there's so many people that go to the ballot box and they've picked a team. They've picked Team Republican or they've picked Team Democrat, and they think that means something. And what I've learned by studying these individuals is that it doesn't. You really have to look at the individual person that you're voting for and see what they're doing while they're in office, judge their job performance, instead of the team that they align with.
The world faces peak gold according to Goldman Sachs, but one geologist who's discovered more than 30 million ounces of gold says he knows where to find America's hidden gold deposits. Featured on the History Channel's How the Earth Was Made, this expert gold finder could be on the verge of a massive gold strike. Even a billion-dollar gold giant has engaged this small market cap company to use their proprietary technology. For the thrill of gold discovery with a new edge in Nevada, visit futuremoneytrends.com/gold.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into crushthestreet.com. I am Kenneth Amaduri, and I'm joined today with Jen Briney. She's the host of the Congressional Dish podcast. And after growing weary of the horse race style nonstop election coverage that passes for political news in the mainstream press, Jen began reading the bills after being crafted in Congress and discovered a treasure trove of secrets hidden in plain sight. Congressional Dish focuses on these secrets and the important information included in the bills that are on their way and that sometimes do become law. Jen, first of all, thanks so much for coming on the show with me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
First off, I haven't really come across anyone who does what you do and is looking out for the American people by investigating bills in Congress. How did you get involved with this?
Well, I mean, the short story is I recognize that too, because I wanted to know what was actually going on in Congress, like legislation-wise, and I was having so much trouble finding that information for myself. I mean, there's a few blogs that do okay. There's The Hill that'll sometimes get into the details, but reading these bills is somewhat difficult, and journalists would much rather cover elections and what politicians say as opposed to what they do. And so there was one day in late 2010 that I was watching C-SPAN, figuring that was a better way for me to find out what was happening. And I saw a congressman from Oklahoma slip something into a funding bill for energy and water projects that would protect secret campaign contributions. And I took to the internet and I found nothing, not a single article, not a blog, nothing. No one noticed that it happened. And so that's when I realized that there's things going into these bills and laws that we're not aware of. And the more I started reading the bills and figuring out, how to understand what I was looking at,
right,
the more I understood what I was seeing, the more I realized that there are so many stories inside of these bills and laws that aren't being covered and should be. And so I learned how to start a podcast, and here I am about 4 years later, and it's going pretty good. So
hey, well, that's the beautiful thing about the internet.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to elected officials, we hope that they're acting in the best interests of the people. Kind of like when you go to the doctor, you don't necessarily know the research and have the schooling of what all the doctors know, and you hope that they act in the best interests of the people, their patients. But obviously this isn't the case when it comes to our government leaders. And so what are some of the most scandalous things you've uncovered in your research while digging through these bills?
I think the most scandalous thing that I've witnessed so far is there was a bill that was supposed to, it was a law that was supposed to stop congressional leaders from trading on their insider knowledge. It was called the Stock Act. And exactly a year after it was signed into law, and they had a big signing ceremony, and all of them showed up, and all the press was there. Well, exactly a year after that, they gutted it by passing a bill basically through the House and the Senate when no one was there. So it's something called unanimous consent, where you get up and you say, all right, I would like to pass this bill. And if no one says no, it just passes. And so when you do that in an empty room, then it just passes. And then Obama signed it into law. So because of that, what the Stock Act did, I mean, it wasn't that strong of a bill. It would have given us a website so that irritating people like me can go and look through the financials of our government leaders and see, what stocks they own, to see if there's some kind of corruption there. And that whole website disappeared with the gutting of the Stock Act. And that was a bipartisan move because that was in the last Congress. So the Republicans gutted it in the House, the Democrats did it in the Senate, and the president, President Obama signed it into law. So that was that was eye-opening for me. And that was in the 4th or 5th month in the podcast. And then since then, I've just seen these 1,000-page bills. That's how they generally fund our government. And they stick all kinds of things in there that shouldn't be there. I mean, with the last government funding bill, which passed in January, we had something that gutted the Dodd-Frank Act. I mean, it didn't gut it, but it definitely makes it a lot easier for banks to gamble with our deposits again on Wall Street, which is very annoying to me. And then there was another one that drastically increased the amount of money that rich people can give to political parties. And that was just slipped in the government funding bill, because that's a really good way to get things that would never become law on their own into law. Just basically, they call it a rider because it basically catches a ride on must-sign legislation and becomes law. So those riders are the most continuing of scandals, because I see it all the time.
Wow. So
Yeah.
you're talking about bills that are thousands of pages. Do the congressmen have the time to actually read these laws and these bills that are being passed?
No, there's absolutely no chance. And the reason that I know this is because that's what I was trying to do. I made the very naive assumption that I should be able to read all of the bills. And I tried really, really hard. And I actually just changed the structure of my show, because in July, when I got to the episode, summarizing all of the bills, I had 65 bills that passed Congress, and they totaled almost 4,000 pages. And there's just no way that one human can do that. So I've found summaries that are prepared by, I assume, staffers, but I'm not entirely sure. And I think that is what the congressmen are depending on to find out what's in a bill. And what's been stunning for me ever since I discovered these summaries is how often they're either inaccurate or misleading or leave out very important information. So that's really concerning to me too. But it makes sense, because these people, especially in the House of Representatives, they are up for election every 2 years, and they consider fundraising to be their most important job. So that's another factor. I'm reading the bills full time and producing a podcast about it, but they're fundraising mostly full time. So they show up and vote based on what they think is in the bills. But no, they're not tearing them apart and making sure that they know what they're voting for. There's no way. It's not possible.
So who are benefiting? Are you seeing any corporations directly benefiting from some of these bills? And is there like a common denominator as far as the most powerful companies in the world that are kind of in bed with the government?
Yes, absolutely. It's shifted between the last Congress and this one, but in the 114th Congress, the financial industry is getting all kinds of favors, and those are actually becoming law, which is interesting. And the pharmaceutical industry is getting a lot of favors too. So I'd say that those right now are the two most powerful ones. What I've seen, which is very interesting too, is that from the last Congress to this one, had you asked me this question 2 years ago, I would have said that fossil fuels was one of the most powerful industries. And this year I'm seeing very little of that. So I guess that's a bit of good news. But the financial industry in particular is getting pretty much anything they ask for.
So you mentioned the pharmaceuticals, and that has triggered something in my mind, is vaccines. And have you uncovered any funny business in this area? And this is a sensitive topic. I mean, I have kids, and obviously I don't want my children to suffer from polio, or I don't want them to suffer from measles or something that is going to be debilitating. But at the same time, I know there are special interests and there's issues involved. And that's kind of the general argument that most people have, is that, hey, well, I don't want to get the disease. I don't want my kid to get the disease. And what is your analysis on this?
Well, actually, the federal government hasn't done much on vaccines. I just did an episode fairly recently because there was a 6-page bill about the anthrax vaccine in particular. And this was one of the most fascinating rabbit holes I've ever been down. But they were going to give expiring vaccines to people who volunteer in the United States. So not military people. People in the military get the anthrax vaccine all the time, but this would be for civilian first responders if they volunteer. And it was the expiring part that I found really interesting. And what I found is that since 2001, we've been buying an enormous amount of anthrax vaccine, way more than we would ever use. And so it's one of the reasons they want to inject people with the expiring stuff, because we have these stockpiles that are basically going bad. So that was really fascinating to me. But when it comes to overall vaccines, they're really not touching the subject at all, which, depending on how you feel vaccines, is probably a good thing, because I think people do have the choice about whether or not, they inject them into their kids. But really, there really hasn't been much at all, which is good.
Yeah.
So, with this particular Congress, I feel like if they're not touching a subject, it's probably better, because so much of what I've seen is favors to industry as opposed to doing things that are good for the people. And that's not entirely the case. I'm actually doing an episode this week on 8 bills that became law that are decent, but they're not doing anything big and major to really help the public. They're doing plenty to help companies, but not so much for us, it's disheartening. It is.
When it comes to cybersecurity, the Senate recently passed the CISA bill.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get your thoughts on this. Obviously, it's this dynamic between the businesses and between the government and them ultimately taking power over the people. So maybe you can give us a little bit of your analysis on this bill, and again, just kind of expose the issues for what they are.
Yeah, this was a bill that I was actually hoping to like, because a lot of the rhetoric around cybersecurity is we need to protect our national infrastructure, our critical infrastructure, which makes perfect sense to me. There's dams and there's our electricity grid, which are all, electronically controlled. So if a foreign power, or even just some hacker with mischievous intent got control of that would be a big problem. And so that is why they're saying they're passing CISA, and there's 2 companion cybersecurity bills in the House that are currently being merged. The problem is that I read all 3 of these bills, and the true intention is to allow any private company, and that's not an exaggeration, it actually says, quote, any private entity. It would allow any private company to transfer information to the government and get immunity for doing so. And the definitions of the cybersecurity threats that they would be transferring is so broad that it allows just about any information to be transferred. So I have serious concerns about these cybersecurity bills. And the thing that bothers me the most is how much support they have in both the House and the Senate. And the president is not issuing a veto threat. In fact, he said that he's pretty happy with the bill that came out of the Senate. So what's concerning is that a few years ago, in 2012, there was a bill very similar to this, CISPA, that there was a big outcry amongst people, especially on the internet, and they were contacting their representatives and their senators, and that bill got shut down. I am not seeing the same thing with CISA, even though this bill, I think it's worse. I read CISPA too. I think this one's worse. So, yeah, I'm definitely Debbie Downer today, but but CISA is a serious concern. It's just never good to give blanket immunity to every private company for anything,
Well, here's an opportunity to be optimistic. If Americans don't like a specific bill, what is the best way to fight it?
Well, this was cool. So I got to talk to Jack Abramoff a couple months ago, and if you don't know who he is, he was basically the most effective lobbyist in the world until he got too good at it and went to prison. So I got to talk to him, and he told me that calls and emails to your congressman makes a huge difference. They actually record every one of them as if it's from 10 people, because they know so many people never call. And what I've come to understand, this makes sense to me, is that we always talk about the influence of money in politics, and we feel like we don't have a say because none of us, very few of us are billionaires. But the thing is that all of that money goes towards influencing votes. So if you communicate with these people and say, hey, I have this vote and this is how I intend to use it, that has more power than any money can, because the money is going towards advertisements, it's going towards those annoying things in the mail, it's going towards television spots, but all of that is going towards influencing your vote. And so, strangely enough, even after learning all of these pretty disturbing things, the more I read the bills, I have more hope than ever, because I feel like I've been lied to in regards to my power to control this system. And now that I know that I have more power than I thought I did, it's actually been wonderful, and I feel great about everything that I'm learning, because I feel like there's something I can do about it now.
A lot of us that do our own research, we feel we don't necessarily align ourselves with Democrats or Republicans, because I think it's hard to put a stamp on one or the other as far as like an endorsement. But would you say you align more with the conservative side or the liberal side in your thinking?
See, I don't even agree with those terms meaning anything anymore, because what I've witnessed is that there is this divide that we're told that we're supposed to have in this country between Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, the red team and the blue team. But really, it's between these moneyed interests and the rest of us, kind of like the owners of not just businesses, because I own my business, but owners of multinational corporations and all of us that work for them and all of the customers. And that's the true divide. And I think that's been obscured for a very good reason, which is because we outnumber them by billions, quite literally. And so when I look at this divide, are you liberal or are you conservative? I feel like it does us such a huge disservice to even label ourselves that way, which is why I'm really avoiding your question. I won't label myself that way because the definitions don't seem to work. You know, I believe in budgeting. That doesn't make me a conservative. You know what I mean?
Right.
I think that just makes me, I don't know, smart. And so, you know, to label yourself fiscally conservative, but at the same time, like, I would love for my gay friends to get married. Like, where does that put me? You know, I just think it's not good to put ourselves on these nonsense teams so that we fight with each other and we're not paying attention to what's actually going on. So where do I fall on that spectrum? I don't know. I don't care about the spectrum at all.
Well, I mean, if I was to put a label on you, you sound libertarian in certain ways. But I guess I asked you that question because you mentioned voting or calling your congressperson. And the problem is we don't have much of a choice when it comes to who we vote for. Because like you said, we have the money that's kind of deciding things. So
Yeah.
I guess if we do have to go out and vote, I mean, where do we make the biggest difference? And I guess you said calling our Congress person, and that's the strongest thing that we can do?
On a day-to-day basis, yes. But honestly, there's no reason why we can't put our own names on the ballots. I mean, they're making that much harder. And when I say they, I mean the Democratic and the Republican parties. They have gone through the states to rig so many systems in their own favor so that these two parties have control over our system that it actually makes me sick. I'm doing a project right now where I'm looking at all 50 states, and I'm going to rank them on the easiest to get your name on the ballot to the hardest. And there's some locations where it's 25 signatures and you're in. So, if you're in one of those locations, put your own name on the ballot. If you don't like who's there, go ahead and run. You know, this isn't supposed to be a career. The fact that we have 40 people, the fact that we have people that have been in the House of Representatives for 40 years on a 2-year election cycle is not how it's supposed to be. But I think we need to accept, I mean, we being regular people, that nothing's going to change if we're not willing to get involved. We all want someone else to run. We all want someone else to change what's happening. At a certain point, we need to step up and say, okay, this isn't working for me. I have to do it myself. So, and then that also goes towards voting more often. So if you're not going to be that person, you need to show up early, especially if you decide to vote in one of these two major parties. You need to show up early and have your voice known in the primary process, or even earlier than that in like the town halls when they're deciding, especially for your local representatives, who is going to be on the ballot. So many people think that they've done their job of voting if they show up once every 4 years for the presidential election. That couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, I think you're kind of right that we've lost most control over the presidential election, which is such a shame because it's the only one that so many people pay attention to.
I don't align myself with the Republican Party, but I would say, especially on fiscally things that involve money and budgets and ideals as far as big government versus small government, I do align myself more with the Republican Party. But
here's my question. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you here just because I've been watching their budgeting for the last 3 years now. And one of the things that I've noticed so many times is that they'll include things in bills that say that this thing that they do won't be counted towards the budget. So they're screwing with the numbers, and it'll be by billions of dollars. So it's like they say that they're good at budgeting, but it's because they just hide the effects of the things that they do. And so, we all think the Republicans have the reputation of being fiscally conservative. So people align themselves with that party, myself included. I voted for Bush in 2000 before I knew anything about anything. But now that I'm seeing how they actually budget, that reputation is not deserved.
I do agree with you, and that's the problem with it. But I guess what I was going to say is that
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Fine. I appreciate what you actually brought up there. The Democrats tend to be just blatant about their intentions. The Republicans may be deceitful in other things, but they're just blatant in terms of what they want to do. And a lot of what they say is just feel good, and it appeals to an ignorant voter in that, I'm going to get free stuff. I'm going to get taken care of. Women are going to make more. All this stuff when it comes to those things. And even a guy like Bernie Sanders is coming out and wanting everyone to come out and vote. And I think the problem with everyone going out to vote is that the majority of the people don't take the time to actually do research on what it is that they're voting for. And I think if we have just the whole population voting, we'll have much more people voting for what sounds good to the ignorant ear. And any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily, there is some ignorance, that's true, because people don't know what's on their ballot. And what they're voting for. But I think the way we think about government in general has become an issue in this country, because I think it comes down to a matter of a return on our investment, because we all pay taxes for the most part. And I think we're focusing so much on the paying of the taxes that we don't look at it as we're paying to receive something back. And so I think what happens when people are saying, well, this is what the priorities should be, I think that's kind of the aim of a lot of that rhetoric, saying you've invested your tax money in this government. Shouldn't it go towards your roads and bridges, for instance, or shouldn't it go towards doctors the way it does for firefighters and military members? So there's a definite disagreement on what the tax money should be used for by the people in Congress, because it's their job to look at that. But what I'm noticing in regards to the voters, we focus so hard on the amount that we're being taxed that we don't have these same conversations that our congressmen are in what should we be getting in return. And so, it's so hard to generalize, because there are certain people in each party that do the same thing with their rhetoric. I mean, I don't listen to much of what they say anymore because I'm reading these bills. But I do think that that's an important shift that we need to look at when we vote, is what do these people want to do with your tax money after they receive it? You know what I mean?
I do, and it's great advice. And it's important that people actually get educated on what it is that they're voting for, and I guess call their congressperson and really, and that's the importance of you and getting your message out there, is that people do get educated and find out what's really going on, because if people are ignorant, nothing really can change. So, Jen, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to share any last thoughts that you had. If you had anything on your mind that you were hoping to be able to say, feel free to share it.
I think we actually covered quite a bit. I guess the one thing that I'm trying really hard to do is to encourage people not to vote based on party anymore. I really would like people to look at the individual, because in both parties, you said that you lean towards the Republicans. There are certain people that, the Republican Party has gotten very interesting because there's a definite divide there, which is no secret. There's the Tea Party Republicans and everybody else.
Let me rephrase that. Republican ideology, small government. That's what I lean towards.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, now that I'm looking at the bills that are being crafted and I'm learning who these individuals are, they're so drastically different from each other in their ideology. There's a guy named Walter Jones in North Carolina who votes independently all the time. And And my vote for him would be different than it would be for the rest of the country, or for the rest of the party. So there's so many people that go to the ballot box and they've picked a team. They've picked Team Republican or they've picked Team Democrat, and they think that means something. And what I've learned by studying these individuals is that it doesn't. You really have to look at the individual person that you're voting for and see what they're doing while they're in office, judge their job performance, instead of the team that they align with,
Right.
That's the one thing I really want to encourage people to do.
And if people want to visit you at Congressional Dish Podcast, where would they go? And what would they find?
Well, I have a website, which is called congressionaldish.com. You can get every episode of Congressional Dish there. You can also find it on any app where podcasts are found. So iTunes is obviously popular, but there's it'll soon be on Google Play in a few months. And there's also an app just for Congressional Dish. So if you're not into podcasts, you can just download Congressional Dish from the App Store or from Google Play, and there you go. It's right on your phone. You can also contact me on Twitter at Jen Briney, Briney. That is the easiest way to find me. It's my favorite social media. And then I have a Facebook page too, also under the name Congressional Dish.
Everyone, that's Jen Briney. Jen, thanks so much for coming on the show with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.